Now I'm going to disassemble the rear differential, or the rear bevel gear drive unit, as Artic calls it. I'll start by taking out these 8 bolts. Sorry, 9 bolts that hold this cover in place. These 2 bottom bolts are a bit of a job. They're pretty ground up. Looks like from the scuffing and everything on here at some point, bottomed out, hit some rocks or something, or went through some mud and ran into some rock and shaved off a good part of the head, so I can't get a socket on there. So I'll try and grab it with some vice grips. Okay, and once you remove all the bolts, then some very careful light tapping with a very thin blade screwdriver around the perimeter. You can usually get a little bit of a gap on one side. Keep the screwdriver in there and do the same thing on the opposite side, and pry and shimmy, and eventually that'll slip right out. That seals with an O-ring right there, and that's what kind of keeps it tight in there when you're pulling it out. And then you've got 2 shims here, and then you can see the large bearing, and you can see the other side of that seal, which is a big seal. And now we're going to remove the gear. Okay, the ring gear assembly slides right out. The teeth look really good. No chips, no major damage. No, it looks real good. I've got some more shims in here, and then there's the other bearing, and there's a bearing in here at the end of the pinion gear, and then there's the big bearing in here. Just a quick note, spacer first, then the shims. Alright, we're back to work on the rear differential unit, or rear bevel gear assembly, as Artic calls it. Anyways, ended up getting a kit off of eBay for about 40 bucks with shipping, which is a real good deal. It's a QBoss 41-3411 differential bearing kit. And what's in this kit are all of the seals and the bearings for this unit. What it doesn't contain is it doesn't contain a new O-ring for where the cover actually seals the unit. It doesn't contain any of the little washers or O-rings on the various little ports for draining the fluid or checking the fluid level and stuff like that. So it also doesn't contain this little breather, but this breather actually is in pretty good shape. I'm just going to get a new clamp to replace this little wire tie that's on here. It's kind of ridiculous what Artic wants for this little clamp that goes on here. I'll be able to find a small hose clamp that'll work perfectly fine, a stainless steel one for that matter, for much less than what they want for that part. So I'm going to replace that with a stainless steel hose clamp. Anyways, what's in this kit? You've got all the bearings, which you've got this small roller bearing right here, which is actually inside there. I haven't removed it yet. You also have this large bearing, which goes down in there, and then you have this big bearing, which is actually behind this unit here called the bearing carrier, which I'll get to that in a minute. And then you also have this huge bearing here, which actually is the bearing that holds up half of this shaft and gear assembly. So that's actually on the cover. That's not here right now. It's upstairs because I've taken it to the store to size an O-ring for it. Again, O-rings, Artic original part number O-rings, ridiculous money. Generic O-rings at an industrial supply or even a decent hardware store far cheaper, so we're going to go with that route. Anyways, this large bearing that I just showed you is actually also the only bearing that is also used in the front differential or front bevel gear unit on this model. So what's nice about that is, as luck would have it, this gear alone is cheapest you can get this gear for is about 40 bucks on a website called hyperparts.com. Well, this gear, original gear, and the rear diff is actually in good shape. So I'm going to not replace that gear. I'm going to replace all the gears in the rear differential unit except for this gear. And then I'm going to use this gear to replace the bad one in the front differential or bevel gear unit. And then that way I'll have to buy less gears for that, because I couldn't find a cheap kit for the front bevel gear unit. Front bevel gear unit, there was a kit, a generic kit online for 80 bucks plus shipping, but by saving myself about 40, not buying this gear, and just buying the small gears in the front bevel gear unit, which I can get from hyperparts.com for pretty cheap. I'm going to be able to save a lot of money on that. So what I have to do on this one is I have to remove that gear, and I have to remove this little gear, this roller gear in here, and the big one behind here. Now, to get to all of that, what has to happen is I'm going to remove this unit right here, which is held on by a nut, and then I'm going to remove this ring with teeth in it, which is called a bearing carrier. And it seems like what holds that in is that there was actually a small bolt with a pin, which I probably would not have realized was actually what held that in, except when I was looking at the parts list and looking at all the little seals. I wanted to make sure I was going to be able to get all the stuff I needed to reseal this. There's a little rubber washer right here, and then that was on this, and I believe they called this little bolt a retaining pin or something along that line. So that kind of clued me in that, oh, that is what screws in right here, and when it's screwed in, you can see it engages between two of the teeth on this, so that must keep this from being able to turn. And that would indicate to me that what makes this come out is that this probably unscrews. Now it's pretty dirty, so I'm going to try and clean it up some. But first, before I do that, just so I can get my brush in there better, I'm going to take this unit off. Hopefully this unit will come off fairly easily. But before I do that, I wanted to show you the other major issue with this ATV when I bought it, was that the drive shaft was completely disconnected. The rear drive shaft was disconnected, and something seemed really screwy with that. And what was wrong is this cover, which is called the housing, actually slides onto here, bolts on here, and then this is part of the drive shaft. It's actually got a splined end that goes into the other half of the drive shaft, and then this part right here engages this. Now, according to the parts list, it appears that there's supposed to be a spring that sits on here and rides in there, and I'm assuming that spring just kind of keeps this floating in there so it doesn't rattle. Not positive, but I'll know because I'm going to order the spring, and we're going to get the original Artic spring to see if what comes in. And then supposedly there's supposed to be a bearing that holds the front of this shaft up and mounts in this unit. But upon close examination of this unit, I found that first off, there's what's left of what looks like a seal or part of a bearing stuck in there. And this whole front area here, you can see there's a groove there. That groove's supposed to have a clip that holds the bearing in. The groove itself is in bad shape, and also you can see this area right here that's all ground out. That's not even supposed to be like that, and it's on both sides. So what happened here is this bearing failed, and the seal failed with it, and rather than repair it, somebody just kept riding the unit like that, and this was just probably letting the shaft slap up and down in here with what was left of the bearing parts on it, and grind everything up to garbage. So when I took this out, what's interesting about this is that there's what's left of a double roller bearing inner race stuck on it, and this spring is sandwiched in here, and then this sleeve is on here, and the sleeve appears to be a separate part from the shaft. When you look at the parts breakdown, the shaft appears to be pretty smooth along its shank. It doesn't show this. So I don't even know what this part is. And this spring might be the spring that was supposed to be in here. And this looks like it's the remnants of the bearing that failed. So it looks like somebody probably had this apart and just kind of slapped this stuff on the shaft any which way, trying to put it all back together. So it's kind of a puzzle to me. The good news is I didn't want to try and reuse this housing because of the shape it's in. I found a used housing on eBay, and I think they wanted like $45 for it, or best offer. I offered them $25 and they took it, plus a few bucks shipping. So I've got a good used one of these, well, allegedly good used one of these on its way. So when that comes in, hopefully it'll be in much better shape than this, and I'll be able to see what it's supposed to look like. I'm hoping that they even left the old bearing in the one that's coming, because I don't want to use the old bearing. I'm going to replace it, but at least I'll be able to see where it's supposed to be exactly, and maybe even there's what's left of the seal on there. It's also supposed to be a rubber boot that's off of this, that covers this whole thing and keeps dirt and water and grime from getting into the front of this thing, and that was completely missing also. So I'm going to get that also. So we're going to wait for this to come in before we do anything with that, and I'm not even going to try and take these pieces off of here until I see what comes in for the replacement for this one. But right now I'm going to get to I'm going to try and take this bolt off, this nut off, and see if I can get this unit off. Okay, tried to disassemble this and ran into some problems, and what I discovered is that first, it's really hard to grab this at all well enough to actually loosen this very tight bolt nut. And the reason why is because there's actually a special tool that Arctic Cat has that Arctic Cat dealers probably have, and found it online, and it's over $150 to buy it. And all it is it's a sleeve with splines that engage these inside splines here, and it's got a hole in the middle, and it's got basically a long bar that comes off of it, so you can hold it with some leverage and then insert a socket through the hole in the middle, and that actually holds this steady, so you can unloosen that nut and then remove this. And once you remove this, then there's a second special tool which looks like a large socket, but it actually has an end that engages, it slides into that space right in there all around, and so it almost has like a star, multi-point star shape to it, and it actually engages the inside. You can actually see the points there. It engages that, and then you slide a rod through it and actually rotate that to unscrew this. It has nothing to do with these little teeth here that I thought originally. The teeth are only there so that when you insert this little bolt here, which acts as a retaining pin, it slides in there and keeps this from loosening. So, long story short, special tool required to hold this to remove this, special tool required after you get this off to remove that inner bearing stop. So, looks like I can either buy the tools, which each tool was over $150. They retail for almost $200, which is ridiculous. Or I can fabricate something, which I could probably fabricate something to take this off, but I don't think I can fabricate anything to take off that inner one because of the strange shape. On later models, apparently it was almost a nut shape that was in there, and the part that slid in there looked like a large flange nut attached to a large socket piece. But can't do it with this one, so I think the best bet now is going to be to take this to an Arctic Cat dealer and service center and ask them to remove this and this for me so that I can continue my my work here. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this seal and the bearing on the inside there so that I have one less thing to do later. And that seal is going to be pretty easy to pry out. I'm just basically going to get a large screwdriver blade underneath there and pry it out. As I suspected, large blade screwdriver underneath there, a little bit of prying, this pops right out. So there's your seal. Once the seal is out, that actually exposes the back side of this bearing, which will make it easy for me to put a brass drift in there and tap down and actually push this bearing out of its casing. Alright, so I got this hunk of brass that I use as a drift. Basically put it right on there and tap on each side a little at a time with a ball peen hammer, and boom, bearing pops right out. So there's the old bearing. And this one might be okay, but I'm going to replace it because a new one came in the kit. And not only that, but if there were any metal shavings in here from any problems with any of the other bearings or anything like that, they tend to end up getting in here and ruining these anyways. So we'll replace that.